Hello and welcome to this review of The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. If any of you know how to bypass Android's ridiculous mirror imaging, do please let me know in the comments. I've done everything that I can, no one seems to know. The May update that I did means that you have to read backwards, but if you love reading you probably can read backwards. I can read backwards in mirror image, so fingers crossed you can too. Or you could just believe me. Margaret Atwood wrote The Testaments, which received the Booker Prize in 2019. It was a follow-up from The Handmaid's Tale, of course, which was published in 85, but got a lot of ascendancy in the 2000s. Consequently, this was published in 2017. When I started reading it, I had this little vision in my head of how it came about. I imagined that because of the resurgence of the first novel, which I talk about in the review of the first novel, which it's the one just before this one, I might link it below if you want me to. Tell me if you want me to. So, The Handmaid's Tale had a huge resurgence in the 2000s due to various things that were happening in America. As a result of that, I had this little imaginary scenario in my head where the publisher went to Atwood and said, "There's so much interest in your novel. Can you come up with another one?" And of course, Atwood could, because there's such a depth of research in The Handmaid's Tale, and all the characters, even the bit characters, have got so much happening there. They're like real people. There must have been a huge amount of research. And Atwood would have lived with that story while she was writing it. She would know so much more about the characters and the kingdom and the Republic of Gilead. She would have known so much more about all of it, and this would have given her a chance to write it. And she's an author, so of course she wrote it. She had more to say, and she's a professional author, so she told us all about it. And having finished the book, I read the little afterword, which once again is the 13th symposium about people who are studying Gilead. But after that there's the acknowledgements, and Atwood says that it was written in many places, and that The Testaments was written partly in the minds of the readers of its predecessor, The Handmaid's Tale, who kept asking what happened after the end of the novel. And this one came about 35 years after the original, which is a long time for a sequel to come. But people apparently were especially asking her about the fall of Gilead and what happened to the characters in The Handmaid's Tale. So this comes. In many ways, it's as ambiguous and open-ended as The Handmaid's Tale was. We still never know the actual name of Offred, or the character who was Offred in The Handmaid's Tale, if the character we meet here is Offred, and that is never concluded. I really enjoy how Atwood leaves it open. It could be any one of a number of things, and I like that attempt to engage the reader's imagination as well as the author's. So I really do like that. In other ways, this novel is considerably more heavy than the original one. This one runs to the 400 pages. The other one didn't. There's a few other ways in which I found it was significantly different to the first one as well. This is far much more a modern story in so many ways than The Handmaid's Tale was, and I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment. So here we've got the strong teenage female lead who must escape, whereas in The Handmaid's Tale, she was a much more ambiguous character. She was more mature, she was more trapped. It was less of a coming of age and less of an escape, rather than an investigation of the personal experience. And I'm sorry, but this review is going to basically compare The Testaments to The Handmaid's Tale the whole way through. I don't think there's any other way of really reviewing it. I don't think it can be a book that you read in isolation. I think there's too much harking back to The Handmaid's Tale to make someone able to pick this book off the shelf on its own with no previous knowledge and really enjoy it. I'm not saying you couldn't enjoy it if you'd watched the movie or the series or whatever it is. I'm not sure about that. Now, regarding the characters and the writing, this is far more young adult enabled than The Handmaid's Tale was. I'm not saying that young adults can't read The Handmaid's Tale, and I'm not saying that young adults can't read anything at all they like. When I was a teenager, I certainly did. I actually read things that I probably shouldn't have gone near as a child before I was even a teenager. I read whatever I could. But there are certain trends, and this harks back to a video that I saw on the Outlaw Booksellers channel just a couple of days ago, just before I started reading this actually, where he's bemoaning the fact that so much young adult literature, especially in science fiction and fantasy, I believe, has less depth, less gravitas to its writing than an adult book was, and he accuses himself of being a grumpy old man and saying it's not actually making people better readers or more informed. He thinks it's a form of self-indulgence, of comfort reading, but it's not necessarily building up a reader's capacity. It's not promoting maturity in reading, I guess is what he's saying. So forgive me, Outlaw Bookseller, if I've misrepresented what you said. I'm still on the fence about what he said there. I like a lot of young adult literature, and yes, it's escapism, so what? I like escapism. I'll read escapism. And the whole, at least they're reading something, debate. There's a lot to debate there, which I could debate with reference to various books, and probably will one day when I run out of books to review. Okay, I'll probably do it one day even without running out of books to review. However, to me, The Testaments is basically very, very believable as a young adult modern fiction. First of all, we have that strong female lead that apparently is obligatory in every young adult series in existence. The escape from, in this case, a totalitarian patriarchal regime, but it's always from something. We have all the narrative skips from one point of view to another that is the hallmark of modern writing, and which I don't like. I can bear with it at times. It's never going to be my favorite tactic. It's not as bad here as in some other things I've read, but it's not as good either, because basically we have several narrative viewpoints. We've got the young teenage Daisy in Canada, who's later finds out she's a mythic figure to Gilead, almost baby Nicole. She goes through a few manifestations of who she is and what she's doing. You've got the teenager, the young adult Agnes Jemima, who's in Gilead, who we have very good reason to suspect early on is the daughter that Offred is remembering in The Handmaid's Tale. And I figured out very, very early on who Daisy, who became Jade, who became baby Nicole, was. I think probably most mature readers reading this will. Maybe some people miss out, I don't know. And then, of course, we've got, by far the most interesting and mature point of view is that of Aunt Lydia, who we meet in The Handmaid's Tale. Here we get her backstory, how she came to be the aunt and how she came to be doing the things that she was doing and why. I didn't personally need that explanation or that validation, but it's a good story and I enjoyed it. We have here far more, what to call it, accessible, I guess, writing. It's easier to read, it's more in keeping with the uncluttered, basic, basically easy narratives. Sorry, blinds. That's better, isn't it? Yes, no blind lines. It's got that uncluttered, easy, accessible writing that is very common in modern fantasy and some science fiction. And all young adult. Young adult is notorious for this unclutteredness, almost superficial writing. I'm not going to accuse Margaret Atwood of superficiality by any means, but the writing is accessible in that way. So you can tell from that it didn't exactly rock my boat, right? I missed the intense literary experience of The Handmaid's Tale. I missed that incredible depth, that well of information that was woven together in every paragraph, and the beauty of the writing. Because The Handmaid's Tale writing was beautiful, and this writing is nice. I also missed the single narrator as well. Here we don't have as much popping around in time and space. We don't have the timey-wimey stuff that The Handmaid's Tale had. But there we had one narrator. Here we've got multiple narrators. So it's a little from column A, a little from column B. Multiple narrators and timey-wimey stuff are two things that I really don't love. At least we only had one per novel. But I did miss the single narrator. And one of the reasons is because it's hard to tell these three narrators apart. You've got captions telling you where you are at a time, so you know one's Aunt Lydia based on the caption. Later on, you've got testament number whatever, and you know it's one of the girls. But I found the two young girls, when they were escaping Gilead together later in the novel, I found their voices completely and utterly interchangeable. The only way I knew if it was Agnes was if she said Nicole to the other girl. The only way I knew it was Nicole was if she talked about Agnes inside her head. I mean, it is what it is. It's still an exciting story. I still did enjoy it. Didn't love it as much. So for its word count, it's a pretty easy to read, pretty fast book, and I did enjoy it. I'm nitpicking. I do that. That's what I do to books. That's my version of reviewing. Things I like, the things I didn't like. There's a lot here that I did like. I did like the story. I did like finding the fall of Gilead. I did like Aunt Lydia's story once I got past the fact that it felt like a cop-out. Some people are bad. I quite liked Aunt Lydia as the bad guy. Explaining why she was the bad guy initially felt to me like a cop-out, though I came to enjoy her story very much, and I loved her revenge on Commander Judd, and I loved her long, potent scheming to bring down Gilead, which had brought down her world. Beautiful. So that was great. And the fact that the writing doesn't have the same depth and beauty that The Handmaid's Tale had, I mean, I could get away with it. Like, I could get around it. Like I say, it's a much more modern story, so in that way it's more readable and more enjoyable. If I had to be stuck on an island with only one book to read and I had to choose between the two of them, Handmaid's Tale every time. Did I feel engaged with the characters? Yes, I liked the character better in The Handmaid's Tale. I liked that sense of impending doom that wasn't in the Testaments. The Testaments had the good thing that you had a same scene seen from multiple points of view. You had a look at Gilead through Nicole's eyes, though she's Jade when she's seeing it, and she was Daisy before that, because she comes in from Canada, which is still in opposition to Gilead. We learn more about Gilead in terms of its place in society, the surrounding parts of what used to be the United States of America that have separated. Apparently Texas went off in one direction. Canada is the border that most people try to escape from. I enjoyed seeing the fall of Gilead. I didn't find it particularly convincing. The information that Aunt Lydia provides to the resistance, to the Mayday people, is instrumental in bringing down a whole heap of commanders, but that's a purge, and we're told that purges have happened before. We're also told that the reason so many other cities, states, countries hadn't done anything about Gilead before that was because they had a really strong army, the ones that they call the Angels. And Texas in particular didn't want to go head to head with them. I don't see why an extra purge would have made all these other states suddenly want to go ahead with them. And I don't really see that information would have brought down Gilead that fast, because Gilead controlled its own news sources. So I think in the same way Atwood looked to other totalitarian regimes when she's writing The Handmaid's Tale, I think we can look to ones like Iran and say, would information really bring down that regime? I don't think so. And I like the fact that Aunt Lydia did eventually get her revenge, but I didn't find it an exceptionally convincing way out. So, anyway, this book, like the last one, ends with a symposium. This one is of the 30th Symposium of the Gileadian Studies, and we're in 2097. So this is pretty much what it did last time, and it's got the same couple of characters speaking. And basically it's reviewing the likelihood of the sources in this novel, which have been discovered separately, as being legitimate in the same way that the symposium ending in The Handmaid's Tale legitimized those stories. I don't think it was as required here. I did like the fact that it rounded off in the same way that the other one did. I don't think it was required. In The Handmaid's Tale, we got a very constricted view of the world because Alfred herself was so constricted, and we needed that symposium to tell us more about it. Here, it's completely not required. It had some good points. It didn't really add much to the story, in my opinion, but I didn't dislike it. It was enjoyable. And that's the same thing for this whole book. Did it deserve the Booker Prize in 2019? I don't know. I don't know who else was nominated. Was it a good book? Yes, it was a great book. Would I recommend it to others? Sure. Especially if you've just finished The Handmaid's Tale and you go straight onto this one, I would recommend it. Would not recommend reading it on its own. I will hang on to it, and I may well reread it in the future. So it's not a high likelihood, but it's certainly a possibility. From me, there is no high praise. There's so many books in the world, and I will never get to read any of them, all of them, which is kind of nice because I'll never run out of things to read. But rereading is reserved for the ones I really loved. Thank you for watching. Comment to me about books, especially this book. If you loved it and you think I'm completely wrong to have reservations, by all means tell me. I like hearing that sort of thing. And I like discussing books, and you should too. Discuss books, read books, be a book person, because books are awesome.